everyone. I'm Lacey Deal, manager and escrow officer at Chicago Title in the Woodlands. Kelsey McKee is our business development, and Wendy Levanter Cook is our sales manager. So, got the best of the best here.
Good morning, girls.
This morning we're
Ladies.
going to talk about, yes, thank you. So
Ladies, I'm sorry.
We're going to put together the top 10 closing delays as we see them, and really more of what's happening right now, what we're seeing right now in our market, and what's historically been a potential closing delay. Now there is one on here that I did not put because it's a collective effort. Lenders sometimes are a delay or a reason for our closing, but it's not always necessarily the lender. It's more so the timing of stuff and the borrowers not seeing the timeline and how important it is to get all the paperwork in, that's necessary. We've had several closings lately get delayed because of, the borrowers not understanding timelines and needing to get their disclosures in, or their, not disclosures, but their bank statements and their W-2s, and really a full disclosure, because they think that if they don't tell you something, you're not going to find it out, and we all know that that's not true. Please tell us everything, because we are going to find it out one way or another. And usually we're a day or two before closing once it all comes out in the wash, and it's a big headache. So in your packets today, outside of your packet, I just put listed top 10 items, and then inside your packet there's more detailed information. Debbie and Tiffany put together your contract to close and title commitment stuff, and there's detailed explanations of title commitments and an overview, as well as surveys, T47s and all that good stuff with legal descriptions, meets and bounds. That's one of our things. And then title talk stuff about divorces, probates, wills, FERPTA, and foreclosures and short sales. So I have short sales and foreclosures in my number one item. It doesn't happen a lot in our market, and I think that that's the number one reason why it causes a delay in our closings, because we don't do a lot of them. They're sporadic here and there, and it's short sales and foreclosures are one of those specialties that unless you do it every day, something's bound to end up in a snag. So we have put together some paperwork on short sales and foreclosures just as we see it from a title perspective over the years. It's important to set realistic timelines in short sales and foreclosures, because, they should really rename short sales and call them long sales, may never happen sales. The last one I did, we started it in June, and in December it canceled and did not close. So.
Was I there? We had one agent, it took a year.
Yeah, it does take time. I just brought on a new closing team, and we have a bilingual person now, and they were working on a short sale where they were working before, and they ended up leaving the transaction just for the sake of it being able to close on time. And they met with their client on Friday and said, how did the closing go? Did it close? No, they've rescheduled it to December, and it was supposed to close in October. So, short sales they're one of those tedious processes that you really need to be all hands on deck and be revising HUDs and working up HUDs, and every day it's a new, they won't pay this and they won't pay that. Your contract, the terms that you set out on your contract on short sales, really from a short sale lender perspective, they're not going to pay for a home warranty. They're not going to pay for the deed and the release to release the mortgage. They're pretty much on short sales, they'll not pay for anything. And the first thing they want to do is reduce your commissions, for it. So just be aware if you run into a client that has a short sale, it's going to happen. Just set those realistic expectations and be prepared for it to be a long process, you know. So, and then on foreclosures, you know, usually it's foreclosures is the bank-owned, you know, real estate, and they tend to have most of your title issues and stuff worked out by the time you happen upon the property, but not always. We've handled several foreclosure accounts over the years, and it's a long, tedious process, and people tend to think that a foreclosure is going to wipe everything out, and it really doesn't always wipe everything out. So our little foreclosure handout kind of gives you a little list of some of the things that you need to do and the things that are not removable, and one of those is IRS liens, child support liens, non-subordinate homeowners associations, and city liens or state liens. So, yes, ma'am?
Are you telling me that the buyer of a foreclosure can wind up with the seller's tax lien?
Well, no, because we would take care of that before the closing. But what usually happens is, you know, you're in on a purchase for a foreclosure, and the seller or the bank thinks that we foreclosed the house so we don't have to deal with any of these issues, and then they open title. And then we get to deal with all the issues by contacting the IRS and the child support, you know, lien and all of that stuff. So they would be cleared through title process. Now, sometimes if you buy property like on the courthouse steps, that stuff doesn't happen, you know. But these are just obstacles that you need to overcome when you're in a foreclosure, and your closings can get delayed on a foreclosure if those items are not cleared. Usually homeowners associations have already been turned over to attorneys, and they filed liens on the property and stuff like that. On HOAs, if it's subordinate, anything that is filed before the foreclosure goes away by simply, you know, the foreclosure. But any charges that occur after the date of the foreclosure, say they foreclosed the property in February and they're not selling it until March or April or May, they would owe dues or any additional liens filed or anything like that in that time span between the sale and the recording.
I had a sale with you one time, and it was the foreclosure, and the foreclosure company wanted to be a do-it-yourself.
Oh, yeah.
You know that?
No, I don't, but keep talking. It might remind me.
Now, whoever it was that held the foreclosed property wanted to mail me all the documents, and remember, and I called you, and I said,
Not happening.
And I thought that was the most interesting, because I know things can go wrong.
Yeah.
And, oh no, it's all done. It was in California. The bank was somewhere in California.
Right.
They wanted a do-it-yourself closing.
Mhm.
And they had someone in Dallas or somewhere that was their bank who looked at it and said it was all well and good. And we were just going to sign and send it back.
Yeah, that's crazy. I have one right now that was a deed in lieu of foreclosure. It just closed, but it was a crazy process, and it was the first time in 10 years, almost 10 years, that I've had a deed in lieu of foreclosure. But it was pretty much as bad as the foreclosure short sale, because we just went on for months and months and months, because when we got title in, the title wasn't in the contract for the seller who was supposed to be the seller. Come to find out, they were the mortgage lien holder, and they did a deed in lieu of foreclosure, got the prior owner to sign it, but they never recorded it. And so they had to go rummaging through their paperwork and find that, and so our closing got delayed for that very reason. People tend to think, oh, it's just title companies are a waste of money or whatever, but we prove ourselves over and over again every single day, because what happens, or what you think happens or should have happened, doesn't always happen. It's always something.
Mortgage companies blame you all the time, right?
Well, it's a love-love relationship.
But we know the title company's holding their feet to the fire.
It makes me so mad when they say that.
Yeah, well, we like to partner with great lenders. That's the key.
If it's a
is
good lender,
if you're
you don't have
partnering
any
with the great
problems.
lenders, you don't have that problem. And that's really the key to making all of our lives easier and at least work towards the common goal.
Teamwork.
Teamwork. That's what you teach our kids that. I think we forget it along the way. Okay, so number 2, I have listed repairs not completed prior to the walkthrough. I had closing that was supposed to happen on Friday, and it got delayed. After it's been delayed, it was supposed to close in August. Repairs have delayed this closing over and over and over again. The seller agreed to do the repairs in the amendment, but then
Make it really count.
yeah, they didn't think it was necessary to really do it, or maybe it was one of those things that they thought, well, they're not really going to figure it out or find out that the repairs weren't done, and I guess my buyer is a stickler and had property re-inspected, and it sure enough wasn't done. So, that's something that we're not always involved in. It's more on your side, but I'm seeing more and more that our buyers want things done. If you said you're going to do it,
Well, it's
you need
because
to
they're
do
paying
it.
full price most of the time, too.
Right. Yeah, so it could just be a
That's
market condition thing where they're not letting it slide and they're saying, hey, you got to do this. So maybe the sellers think because there aren't enough houses out there, they're just going to buy it anyway. But if the buyers are paying full price, they want it the way they want it. So. Okay, so that was just a brief one. It's something that we really, on the title side, aren't involved in, but it does delay our closings. So, death, probate, and heirship. These are something, it's a given. People are going to die. It always happens, There's no way for us to stop it. We haven't found that,
And it's terrible when it's the day before closing, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. And
We can't
it's
close
unfortunate.
the buyer died.
I know. I had that happen this year. It was actually the seller. The seller passed away a day before closing, and he was a young man, like 40, and just fell asleep and never woke up. And so, then you're scrambling and you're trying to get approvals. Like if someone dies in the first year, technically you're not, without scrutiny supposed to use heirship affidavits. It's more of an issue because you have so many years to probate. And so we had to scramble to get underwriting approval and get everyone together to be able to use the heirship affidavits to close the transaction. And we were able to do it without a delay, but it can cause, death and probate and heirship can cause delays in closings. That happens frequently. And it's not necessarily because someone passed away unexpectedly, while you're under contract. It's usually older issues, that no one wants to resolve or thinks that their time's going to let it clear itself, and it ends up being more of a headache than you ever expected it to be, especially when you've got a timeline and, a drop dead date for closing. Your seller needs to have all of their stuff in order before they sign a contract,
Stacey,
Yes.
I understand what an affidavit is, but what is an heirship
So,
affidavit?
heirship affidavit is to determine who the heirs of the owner.
H-E-I-R.
Yes.
I'm with you. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I'm
Yeah. And
Yeah, I need a written document.
I need to pass one of these to you. Here,
I thought
here, Frank.
variables went out 100 years ago. Okay, I'm good. Carry on.
Do you need one? Yeah. Give those like that too. You're welcome. Yeah. So, and a thing to know about heirship affidavits specifically is we can turn them around pretty quickly. There are local attorneys out there that we work with that can have them prepared. They're about $275, and it's to determine who the heirs are. Once you determine who the heirs are of the property, all of those heirs, if they're over the age of 18, need to sign. Okay, so yes, ma'am.
If a mother signs over her property to you, and you give her a living estate in that property, it stays on the tax rolls for her. You know what I'm saying?
Like a ladybird deed or something like that?
I don't know if they call it that,
Okay.
but I know I did it with Mother, to where if anything happened to her, I could not ever sell that house until she died.
Right. Yeah, it's a ladybird deed.
Yeah, and then the taxes stay in her name
Right.
with the.
Everything stays in
65.
it. They're not very common, but I have seen it before. Basically, yeah, she would sign the deed, and it's a life estate. As long as she's alive, the property's still hers. But once she
But I didn't
passes,
have to prove any heirship.
right? Yeah,
She did before she died.
we still go through our, rigmarole to make sure everything's in place. But I did close one of those in the last year or two. And I was actually just talking to a local attorney about them the other day because it was,
I
run
suggested
into
it
a
to one of my clients,
particular situation.
because
Did
she
you?
wants to leave it to one daughter and
Yeah.
not the son.
I found that in an estate situation, and I'm not an attorney, but just in our experience of title and what we see is every situation with a probate or an heirship or a death of any kind is different. I've probably in 10 years not closed two exactly the same, even when you have wills, because your wills need to convey over the ownership, and they need to have the right to be able to sell. Well, your average will misses one or both of those
exactly
parts. So it is very tricky. It's important to have wills because, I've seen in people relocating, we're a huge relocation area, and people relocating in, they think that you can do like with rights of survivorship or whatever. Well, Texas is a community property state, so that doesn't always pass. You really need to have a will in place, and you really need to have a plan in place, for if someone passes away. And airships, a lot of times people think, okay, we're going to do the heirship affidavit to avoid the probate process, and then whoever the spouse is or whatever is going to be the seller. Well, if the person who passed away had children from a previous marriage, those children then receive half of the ownership, of the deceased ownership. So, and then the other half of his ownership or her ownership would go to the surviving spouse.
And he didn't have a will. An heirship is extremely important at that time.
Yes, yeah.
they
Typically, we
always
do
are,
airships
but, yeah.
without wills, but you can do an airship with a will as long as you didn't probate. If you probate is what we follow, and there's so many different, processes for probate, whether you have a will or you don't have a will, and you do letters of testimony or not. It's really all over the map. So that's a class in itself. It really is. Okay, number 4, divorce. Beginning, middle, and end. This is another one that's, you can be separated.
Beginning, middle, and I like that.
That is another class.
Qualifying question. Can you pay for it, or are you getting a divorce?
Yeah, definitely. And there's you run into divorce situations on purchases and on sales. Because if you're a purchaser and you're going through a divorce, but your divorce isn't final, your spouse still needs to sign the deed of trust as a community property state. And
Also,
so
a document that, the reason I say that is I had one that they were in the middle of a divorce, and he bought a house and she bought a house. And he signed off that he wouldn't have any claims on hers.
Right.
And she did the same thing on his.
yeah. But technically they can't do that until the divorce is final.
Well, it was done at a title company.
Well,
I have-
they're going to
I
need to
don't
cover it
think
again in the divorce because, you can.
Marry an attorney or somebody who has an attorney in their family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
know
Yes.
that.
You
Legally,
can be
you
held
shouldn't
up
do
with
it.
a little with a paper gun.
Uh-huh.
I
Yes.
will not sign this
So
unless-
legally,
Right.
you really shouldn't do it.
Well, what? Sign?
Yeah, I mean,
You have to.
You sign the deed, but that piece of paper where you say you don't have any claims on it doesn't necessarily.
It's not going to be final. I mean, it's a good measure. You've got it so that you can say when the divorce does become final or when you're in those finalizing stages, hey, you signed and said this, you don't have any claim to this property. But you're still married, and it's still community property as long as you're still married. So with the divorce decree, you really need to divest any ownership claim or interest in the property with the divorce decree
At that
and
time,
or a
couldn't
separate
you
deed
use the one that they signed ahead?
at that time, as of that date.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
what I'd like to know.
Yeah, so, but divorce can affect your buyers and your sellers, and you can either be in the middle of a divorce, your divorce can already be finalized. I have one right now that we closed with an escrow agreement, basically to say I'm not releasing any of the proceeds until you sellers, divorce sellers, come to an agreement with. It's a weird situation. The seller was being relocated, okay, the husband, and his company is reimbursing him for closing costs. Well, the divorce decree says that he's going to pay for the closing costs to her for what his company reimburses, but that hasn't happened yet. So he had to hold the money until that goes through. And so it's been a constant, talking to the sellers, and I'm stuck in the middle, and I said, hey, I can't be in the middle. I can only follow what the divorce decree says. As soon as you get that relocation money, we're going to transfer it, divide it up according to what the divorce says, and we're done. Otherwise, if y'all can't agree, I'll pay all the money to the court, and then y'all can fight it out in the court. I'm not going there.
I didn't know you could do that.
We don't like to get in those situations. Any situation involving an escrow agreement is complications because, you say, okay, we're going to hold the money for a week, and before that week's up, you need to tell me what to do. And inevitably, the week's over and they haven't decided what to do, and so we end up holding it for longer than we ever wanted to. But in certain situations, we are able to use an escrow agreement. Yeah.
There's another title company here that will not do an escrow agreement.
Yeah.
Go there.
I don't blame them because
Sure, but-
it is a huge situation. It's a huge situation because you get roped into things, but as long as you're diligent with it and you stay on top of them and you understand what you're getting into and you have an out, like I'm going to pay the money to the courts if we don't get this resolved, then you're okay. If it's we never get into a holding back commissions or holding back a portion of this for a repair or anything like that.
It's just between the buyers and the seller, whoever's.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they really, and any escrow agreements need to be approved by the buyer's lender because they need to know that, we're issuing clear title and we know our parameters and there's no risk involved, but this is what's happening. So full disclosure, we're full disclosure title company. We don't do anything, hey, hold my commission while they get this repair cleared or anything like that. Those are just, we don't want to put you in those situations and we don't want to put ourselves in those situations.
On repairs is for the people that are buying it aren't satisfied with the repairs and they can say, we're not going to sign until it's done.
Right.
So it holds up everything, even
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because lenders usually don't want to close a transaction knowing that repairs aren't resolved either.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, I had one a couple weeks ago, a repair issue, and the lender required to do a reinspect on the property to make sure that all the repairs were done. And it wasn't anything that the buyer was concerned with, but closing got delayed. We closed. Funding got delayed a day while they sent out their appraiser to do a reinspect to make sure they were satisfied.
More of that because of the situation what we're in too.
Our market. Yeah, definitely. Missing lien releases, that's another item that most of the time we handle behind the scenes and you never know about it or see it. I mean, you'll see it on our title commitment, but in most instances we handle them. We call the lenders, the payoff lenders, and we track it down, and we're private eyes and investigators, among many many hats
True,
that we wear.
A lot of them are not filed.
Yeah, and from our diligent perspective of sending releases to all payoff lenders when we close the transaction with a letter of instruction to say, return this to us for recording, they never do it. So we're caught trying to follow up with them and make sure that it was sent to the county or it was sent to the borrower. The worst thing is either it's never filed, it's never prepared or signed or recorded, and they sign it and they notarize it and all that stuff, but they send it to the client. Well,
And the client doesn't know to
they
file
don't
it.
know. All they know is this letter says, congratulations, your loan is paid in full. File it away. Never look at it again, never to be found again, all of that.
And the mortgage company never tells them when it's paid off, and we send you a release that you should file it.
Well,
And they don't file it. They won't file it.
just your
for you.
average consumer doesn't know. If they read the second paragraph, it says file this with the county,
They're
but
just so
you don't
happy
get,
it's paid
they're so
off.
happy, yeah. I know, I'm gonna be
Yeah,
jumping
it's
for
paid
joy
off.
when that happens, you know? It's like, okay, file it away, done. But yeah, that's what we find in most instances. We will get sellers involved, and so it's really important that we get contact information as soon as the contract's open so that we are able to communicate with your clients. And we try to loop you in as a courtesy, a carbon copy, so that you know we're communicating with your clients on what's happening. But we want to take the pressure off of you and allow us to handle it with your clients directly. You have so many other things to worry about. Let us handle that part. A lot of agents try to shield them from us because they think we're going to say something bad, but we're experienced and we know what we're doing and we know what we're talking about, so we can handle it without freaking anybody out. I had a missing release recently, and it was a doozy. It was really hard. The poor seller, number one, it almost caused a delay in the closing, but it didn't. But we didn't get his information but 5 days before the closing. So 5 days before the closing, we found out that he didn't have a mortgage at all. Both of his mortgages were paid off. But our title commitment said that there were 2 liens on the property. Okay, so there were 2 liens, that there was a first loan and there was a second loan. But he says they were...
And the agent didn't catch that or know that when she got the title?
Well,
I always ask them if they have a mortgage.
yeah. Well, this is the thing, is that we're not always privy to all of the information. We have to find it out. We find it out on our own, and then we ask.
Buyers and sellers don't tell you that. They don't think it's important.
They don't.
Who
Yeah.
Buyers and sellers, they don't think it's important.
And sometimes,
No, but
if they're
as an
behind, they don't
agent-
want to tell
As
you.
an agent, when you go and get that listing, the
Yeah.
first thing I ask them, do you have a mortgage?
Right.
And they don't necessarily know or tell you.
Oh, sure they know.
Well-
They know if they're making a payment.
Somewhere down the line, what happens is it doesn't get communicated to us. And so we're asking for the information, we're asking for payoff, we're asking for seller's phone numbers, and we finally get it 5 days prior to closing, okay? So we talk to him and he says, no, I don't have a mortgage. So first one was easy. It was Wells Fargo. We have a little insight into them, and we can go into our system, prove that it's paid off with Wells Fargo, and fax a request for a release. Done deal, okay? Well, the second one was one of those small banks that did a pool loan for him, and it went out of business, and then it went into receivership, and then Compass took it out of receivership, and then he threw another wrench into it, and he gave us all of his paperwork from when he closed. Well, there was the first loan with Wells Fargo, a second loan with Gateway Bank, and a third loan with Riverway Bank. But both of the second transactions, or the smaller loans, were for pools and with different companies. And he gave us this paperwork, and he's telling me, no, I didn't do 2 pools. I only have 1 pool. I only have 1 backyard. I'm like, well, obviously that makes sense, but why are both sets of these documents signed? Anyway, I never did find out that part, but we did get releases. And
On both of those?
on both of them. One of them we found out was paid off. The other one we had to request a release for. But it was crazy. And it was like a $300,000 house, but the loan, the only outstanding amount was like $60,000. And so we ended up going ahead with the closing, did the closing, but I held all of his money until we got the release. And the only way that we were able to really figure it out is he was convinced we weren't going to figure it out. I said, look, we do this for a living. We know what we're doing. Trust me, it's going to happen. He said, well, what if it doesn't happen? I said, It will happen. It's never not happened, I promise you. So he's calling me, and by then he was freaking out because we'd closed, but we still didn't have anything. And I told him, I said, you know, it takes 30 days minimum to get a release out of a company once you figure out which company it is that's
So you went ahead and
supposed.
funded it?
We went ahead and funded it, but I held his money, you know, $300,000 or whatever for a $60,000 lien.
It's a motivator.
I got you.
It did get him motivated.
Got you. It
So
motivated.
he was freaking out because he started, once I went through everything with him, he was convinced that maybe he thought that he paid off this loan, but maybe he didn't. And the bank went away, but he never paid them. And so he called me in a panic thinking, what if I really owe this $60,000? And I honestly don't remember ever paying it off, but I thought that it was paid off when I did a refinance and I rolled it all in. Well, that wasn't the case because there was a subordination agreement. So I had him order a copy of his credit report. And I said, you know, you can go to like myfreecreditreport.com or something like that and look. That will at least tell you if it's, you know, if it's behind, when the last activity was, if it's already paid, you can find that out. And so he calls me after he got it and he said, it's not here, Lacey. And I'm like, it's got to be here. Walk through it with me, you know, let's walk through it. So we go down all of them and he's like, there it is. And then he said profanity, but he's like, there it is, you know. And so I was like, okay, what does it say? And he said, well, the last activity was, you know, last payment was like March of 2008, and then it says zero balance of May 2008. I said, okay, you paid it off. That's good. Who does it say? Compass Bank. I said, okay. We've already faxed a request to Compass Bank because we thought that it was Compass Bank, but it might be Texas State Bank. So in our discovery, we found out there's 2 Texas State Banks, one still around and one went into receivership and Compass took them out. So 2 days after that conversation, we got the release from Compass that said that the loan was paid in full. But we were calling everybody we knew at Compass. Can you help us? You know, we really think that this lien has got to be with you. And it's just, if we can work together, we're good. One way or another, we're going to figure it out. But we need to be able to work together, and we need to be able to be in communication with the sellers or the owners, you know, to determine what's happening, where and when and why.
Isn't that what's real important about putting it on that contract? How to get in touch with the seller?
Yes,
How to get in
it
touch
is.
with the buyers?
Yes.
Doesn't that help? you
9
explain
contracts out of 10 come in with your information on that, in that section. I have your information on page 9. I do not need your information on that page. I need the seller's and the buyer's information.
Well, and really in MCE, they teach you agents are not supposed to put their name in that
Right.
section. It's
Yeah.
a no-no.
I think the reason it happens is because when you're negotiating a contract, you don't want your sellers calling the buyers and saying, hey, let's work this out and let's forget about these people who think that they work hard and earn their money, you know?
I don't worry about that.
And so if you don't feel comfortable putting their information in on that page, at least when you send us the contract, send us an email with all of their information, with phone numbers and address. Addresses are important because we do a fraud search for sellers and for buyers on every transaction that we open. And so it's important to have an address, a valid address, not your address, not a family member's address, a current address that's for them is really important so that the fraud search can be done accurately.
I want to ask you something. Like if somebody's moving here from, let's say, Kentucky, I put their Kentucky address in there. Not the one
Now, if
they're
they've already
buying.
sold it,
Yeah, but it doesn't
Probably.
matter. At least it gives you a trail to where you've got to go when
Right.
you do your searches.
and what I tend to do sometimes is I'll use the address that's on their earnest money check. Now, it's not always, 100% if they sold that house last month, but we're not mailing anything to that address. It's just to do the fraud search and to make sure. And the lenders, when we do our closing statement, the lenders want to know what the buyer's current address is on the settlement statement. They don't want your address and they don't want the property address. They want what their current address is. So that's very important for us to have it. Okay, so number 6 is flood elevations or flood certificates or properties in flood. I don't have all of the specific details on this, but I did have a contract just cancel last week due to property being in a flood. Apparently, the property used to be grandfathered in, or it wasn't in a flood zone, and then turns out it is now. And on like a $150,000 house, the new buyers were going to have flood insurance of over $2,000 a year. Yeah. So,
But they have a thing now, because we had a course that they can grant, if you tell your people to go ahead and get flood insurance now, they'll
right.
be grandfathered.
Exactly. And that's my tip, or my hint about that is I have flood insurance on my house because our house, we lived in Oak Ridge when I was in high school. We moved here when I was in high school to Oak Ridge, and we weren't in a floodplain. But my mom had flood insurance on her house, and our house flooded, and we had to move out, 4 kids, my mom and my dad, and into an apartment while our house got completely redone. And so to me, it's cheap. It's too cheap to not have it, you know, for that peace of mind. Yes, ma'am.
I'm from flood country.
Yes, you do.
I'm from flood country.
Miss Louisiana, New Orleans, Katrina.
You live in Montgomery County, flood.
Well, yeah, there's flood. Almost every, flood zones change.
Yeah,
That's
they
what
do.
people don't get. And you can have a flood map, which we had flood maps in our office.
Yeah.
Because it was important. And it changes.
It does
Because
change.
as you build and you pour more concrete, it changes. So you
Yeah.
can't
More
really
trees you
go
cut, the more
about what the
concrete.
seller says, you have to, but isn't that the insurance company's
Insurance, yes.
responsibility?
And
I tell my guys in the first 10 days of their
Yeah.
contract or their option period to always go to their insurance company and have them run that address for
Right.
problems
Food
in the
report.
past
Mhm.
and the flood zone.
There's new-
Because I don't want to be responsible.
yeah,
for everything.
and a lot of the insurance companies now are coming back and saying we can't provide a clear determination because stuff has recently changed, and so they want a flood elevation certificate done by the surveyor. And that's $350 or so. And usually put it with the survey, and it's a total of like $750. But it's something that if
And they used